Hey everybody, sorry for this video coming out so late. I planned on having it out by this weekend, but I had to write, and I'm not kidding, 6 or 7 papers, all ranging between 2 to 6 pages. And I still have a few more to write, but I finished off the main bulk that I had to get done, so now I can focus back on this video. In this final part, I'm going to talk about different pieces of equipment, some other music media formats I didn't really talk about, as well as just some final recommendations and things of that nature. So let's just go ahead and jump right into it. I mentioned this back in part one, but there are all different types of music media sources. And I'm just going to kind of showcase a few of these different media platforms on the screen. And this isn't even all of them. I know I'm still missing a few, but I personally don't know all the different media platforms. These different platforms are kind of niche when it comes to music collecting. And you can find some of them cheap, but then some of them are really expensive. Here's some reel to reel players, some new and old. And as you can see, the prices are insane. And the tapes for reel to reel players can typically range anywhere between like $50 onward to $200 or $300. And that's a ton of money. For $500, as you can see here, some of these reel to reel albums are, you can buy tons of records and even more CDs and probably even more cassettes. But the biggest problem to me is that a lot of these platforms are what I call dead media platforms. And I'm going to use 8-tracks and 8-track players as my example piece. As you can see, you can buy 8-tracks for a somewhat reasonable price, ranging between like $4 onward past $100, just like any other music media platform. And you can buy a nice 8-track player anywhere between like $80 to $200. But they don't make 8-tracks anymore, and they don't really make 8-track players, so you're just stuck with whatever came out at the time. So if you don't like the music from that time, you probably won't like 8-tracks. And you can compare this to the retro video game market, because those systems don't have games coming out for them anymore, and people collect those up. But again, if you like that stuff, you're going to collect it, and if you don't, well then you don't really have a reason to. So what I would recommend is just looking into the platforms, making sure that they have music that you actually like, if it's worth investing for you, and make sure that you get a player that works, and you just don't get stuck with something that you can't ever use and it's like super niche, and if you ever regret getting it later down the road, that you can actually resell it. Because you'll always be able to sell CDs, records, and cassettes and their players, but the other platforms, like I said, they're kind of niche, so who knows? But that's all I really have to say on that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. Now, there are lots of different stereo components that aren't necessarily for music, although I am listing one on here that is a music playing device. And what I mean by for music is that it doesn't play music, but it can affect it or represent it in some shape, way, fashion, or form. You have visualizers which kind of show the music as it's being played. And these are cool, but they're somewhat expensive. And there are some vintage ones that, you have a better chance of getting a used car for a cheaper price. There are also AM, FM radio tuners that you can buy, both vintage and new. However, the newer ones are typically made by Pyle, and I wouldn't recommend them. And there's a ton of vintage ones, but if you don't listen to the radio, I don't really know why you'd get one of these. But if you're like me and you need it to control your entire stereo system, I'd recommend getting it. Mine is the Sony ST-JX520, and like I said, the only reason I need it is because it has the Control S input. The last machine I'm going to talk about is an equalizer, and you can buy these vintage or new, but they range usually around $100, and they can go well above that as well, especially if you're looking for a newer one. An equalizer allows you to adjust the pitch and the sound quality of a record. You can lower certain aspects, raise certain aspects, like bass, for example. And I'll give you a great example of this. Metallica's 4th album, And Justice for All, sounds terrible. The bass is essentially non-existent, and the drums are so over-compressed, it sounds like your head is full of cotton wool as you listen to it. You can thank this potato head for that. But with an equalizer, you can kind of raise the bass and also get rid of that compressed drum sound as best you can. And it's not perfect, but it does enhance the listening experience. And this album is the whole reason I really wanted an equalizer. Now, I was very fortunate that this was a part of that stereo system that my grandparents had, but I will show you the one I have. It is the Sony SEQ210. The price of this machine varies. I mean, you can typically find it for a little under $100, but some people are also trying to sell it for more than that. So you just got to look around if that's the model you want. As you can see, my settings aren't too drastic, but it's enough to where I can hear certain parts of music enhanced while listening to it. Now, don't feel like you have to get an equalizer. They're not necessary for you to listen to music. I mean, the only reason I really got into them was because, I've been listening to music now on a physical platform for 8 years, and I just kind of wanted to toy around with a few of my albums. And that's really it when it comes to additional machines. I know there are more out there like portable systems, but that's not really what I'm focusing on. I'm mainly focusing on stereo systems. And I don't want to spend too much more time just rambling on and on and on about this stuff, because you're going to reach a level of this obscurity that's not going to appeal except to like 3 people. So let's just move on to the next subject. I've already mentioned some pressings in previous videos, but I kind of want to just go a little bit deeper. All a pressing is just that release of an album. You have first pressings, you have special edition or limited edition or whatever edition pressings, and then you just have standard release pressings. And you also have unofficial or bootleg pressings. And pressings also carry over the cassettes and CDs as well. And a little side note for Nirvana fans, don't be discouraged by these prices for first pressing CDs. You can typically find them for under $10. I mean, good God, they made thousands upon thousands of them. But does a pressing really matter? Honestly, it just depends. There are remastered editions of records, and then it does have standard reissues. So, it just depends on what you're looking for. You might not like the sound of the remastered, or you might like it more than the original. So, it's just up to the listener. And I wouldn't get too swept up in pressing variants. As you can see here, some albums have a ton of different pressings, and it can get really confusing really quick and very overwhelming. And as a music collector, you might not want to have multiple different pressings of the same record. I personally do for several albums. The Misfits album Walk Among Us, I have 6 different pressings of, 1 on CD and 5 on vinyl. Saying that out loud makes me realize how crazy that sounds. And I have a lot of first pressings in my collection, and they're all duplicates of records that I already own, or I have special editions that are still duplicates of records that I already own. So, if you get into the hobby of collecting music, you're probably going to start getting duplicates if you want a special release, but if that stuff doesn't appeal to you, then it doesn't really matter. And some pressings, especially first pressings, are insanely expensive. This one right here is $300, and that's an average price for this record. And that's been the stable price for around 3 to 4 years. So like I said, I wouldn't get too carried away with it. But if you see a rare or maybe even a first pressing of an album you really like and it's for a reasonable price, I'd pick it up. The most I've ever paid for a first pressing was $40, and it was Metallica's Master of Puppets. And although the price of that record is now fluctuating, you can typically get lucky and find first pressings in stores and sometimes online for under $50. It's always going to be a waiting game when it comes to buying music, so just be patient and there's no telling what you could find for a reasonable price. But anyway, enough blabber about pressings. I'm going to move on to the next subject because it's really quick, but it's also very important. I've already touched on this, especially with cassette players, but always make sure that you're keeping your systems cleaned and maintained. The number one way to preserve a record's lifespan is just to clean it. And I know I'm not the world's best at keeping my records clean. I don't think anybody is, but there's all types of kits out there, machines you can use to keep your records clean, and even CDs and cassettes as well. And always make sure that parts that need to be replaced after time are replaced, such as a stylus. When used a lot, a stylus will eventually start to just kind of wear down, and so you have to look up when they need to be replaced after a certain amount of playing hours. and replace it when the time comes, because if you don't, it could potentially damage your record. And it's always good to have a can of compressed air nearby. So, like I said, this is a short little subject, but it's also very important. Now, I am no expert when it comes to these subjects that I've been talking about. I'm just simply listing my experiences and what I have learned. So, I'm going to recommend 4 channels that I watch all the time, which help me grow in terms of stereo and music equipment comprehension. The first channel I've already mentioned, which is Recordology. These guys I cannot brag on enough. They are always covering all the newest and some older turntable systems and stereo equipment. They're really, really cool, and they're going to give you honest, genuine reviews. The next channel is V West Life. This guy is an encyclopedia when it comes to modern, vintage, somewhat common, and very much oddity style stereo stuff. If you have a question on something, there's a good chance that he's made a video on it, breaking it down, showing how it works and everything else. I couldn't recommend his channel enough, and a lot of the knowledge that I have about my stereo equipment comes from his channel. Another great channel for this is Techmoan. Again, this guy knows everything, and he covers all types of obscure and really cool music media platforms. And I mean, not just from the US, because he is from the UK, but I mean, he does international music platforms. It's really, really cool, and you learn a ton from him. The last channel I'm going to recommend is Skylabs Audio. These guys, when it comes to vintage equipment, they are the experts, at least in my eyes. They've helped me grow in my vintage stereo knowledge, and they have a really helpful Discord where people will help you if you have problems with your stereo equipment. They're the whole reason I learned about stereo equipment impedance. And there are plenty more fantastic YouTube channels that are based around music. So don't just stick with these four and be like, nope, that's it. Everyone else sucks. I would recommend going out there and just seeing who else is out there who makes really great content on this subject matter. So before I close out this little video series, I want to talk about just 4 little recommendations that I have for everyone who's either new or been into music and music equipment collecting. Now, these aren't like rules that you must follow while collecting, because I don't believe in telling people stuff like that. I find that the people that tell you things like that are trying to deter you from getting into the collecting world of whatever it is you're wanting to get into. So that's why I'm just saying these are recommendations. Make sure that whatever you're wanting is in your price range. You can get a really nice setup for under $300 to $400. I've already shown that in part 1. You don't have to spend over $1,000 on a freaking turntable. I mean, it's not realistic, and it's really outlandish to say that you really have to spend that much. My next recommendation is just to make sure that you like the stereo equipment that you're looking at. Make sure that it is visually appealing to you. You don't want to get something ugly that you don't like. Be like, well, I got it on a good deal, but you hate the way it looks. Make sure you actually like what you're looking at when you're listening to the music. My next recommendation is kind of a big one, which is to make sure that you have a acoustically sound room where you're putting this stereo equipment. Now that kind of sounds a bit complicated, but all that means is you have some type of audio dampeners, whether it be like a couch or some pillows or a rug or just something to absorb some of the audio. That way you're not listening to something in what sounds like an echo chamber. You don't have to technically get those sound dampeners that you can put on the walls that are made of like foam. But I mean, if you want to get those, you can, obviously. And my final recommendation is that the more expensive the stereo equipment or record doesn't necessarily mean that it's any better. And I'll give you a great example of this. This Riga turntable is one of the more higher end turntables that you can get. And as you can see, it's on sale for $700. But if you look at the stylus, it's the exact same one that's on an Audio-Technica LP60, which is an $150 turntable. All you're essentially paying for is the name and bragging rights to say you have an expensive turntable, and that's not worth it. Because at a certain point in your music collecting journey, you're going to want to upgrade your systems. I've done it. Everyone I know has done it if they collect music. And You don't want to get stuck getting the same thing you have, just in a different casing, basically. It would be like getting a 2025 sports car, but the entire interior, including the engine and all that stuff, is from a used 90s car. And there are always going to be people that are going to try to recommend to you that you get the more expensive, even though it's literally going to be the same thing, just because they're in that mindset. If it's more expensive, it's got to be better. But don't fall for it. But what I'm about to say is probably more important than anything else I just listed, which is just do what you want to do. At the end of the day, it's your money and it's you getting into the hobby. You can get whatever turntable you want to get, you can get whatever speakers, you can get whatever everything that you want to get or not want to get. It's all up to you, because at the end of the day, you're in this because you love music. You're doing everything you're doing because you want to just listen to the music. And I think a lot of people who really get snooty when it comes to music collecting have forgotten that you're doing this because you love music, not because you're hunting for something that you're never going to achieve. Because you're never going to get that perfect sound. You're just not. It doesn't matter what medium you're hunting. It doesn't matter which medium you're saying is the best. It doesn't matter what equipment you're using. There's always going to be a flaw because music's not perfect and the platforms they're put on are not perfect. But that's also the charm of them. I mean, I love hearing a record crack and pop here and there. It's just there's something kind of unique about it, and that sounds just unique that other platforms may not have. And I love CDs, and I love cassettes, and I love the way they sound, because you find enjoyment and you find something special about their imperfections, because it's the love of the music. It's not the love of hunting something that's impossible to get. And let's use these Victrola systems again as an example. I had a bad run with one, so I personally wouldn't recommend it. But let's say you're like, nah, I want to get one. Let me see how it works. Well, that's awesome. Get it. They sound fine. A lot of people are going to kind of harp on them, but I think they sound just fine. I mean, like I said, I had one and used the heck out of it. And you can even get upgrades for it as well. You can get a diamond tip stylus for it, which will not only improve the sound quality of the system, but will also improve the lifespan of the system as well. Because at the end of the day, you're in this because you love the music. It doesn't matter what system, what pressing, what platform, you're enjoying the music, and that's all that matters. And don't let anyone try to ruin your happiness of music by telling you what you can and cannot own, because those are the people who aren't actually happy because they're chasing something, like I said, they're never going to get, respectfully. As long as you maintain your systems and get the music you want to listen to, you should be in for a real fun ride. I want to give a special thanks to anyone who has watched all three parts and has stuck around for all three parts. I know these videos are not the best when it comes to quality. In fact, they're probably really crude in the grand scale. But I mean, I don't have as much time as I wish I had to work on these videos. So I know the editing is, I mean, it's a bit rough. It's early 2000s YouTube, but it's the best I can do at the moment. I do plan on working a bit more and finding a new editing software and just overall getting better at the craft of making YouTube videos. I plan on releasing a few more videos over the next few months. Most of them are going to cover music. I know a few are going to be guitar videos, and a few are going to be like music recommendations, like albums and stuff like that. But I don't really know when they're going to come out, just whenever I get the time. Like I said, I have to write a lot, I have to do a lot, and I'm probably about to apply to get my master's as well. So there's just a lot going on. And whenever I get the chance to work on a video, that's when I do it. But like I said, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. So until then, see ya.